When Marcus Chen walked into Belmont's, one of the most acclaimed restaurants in Boston, wearing jeans and a casual shirt, the racist manager took one look and said they were fully booked. Behind her, half the dining room sat empty. What she didn't know, Marcus wasn't just another customer. He was the Michelin inspector who could make or break her restaurant's reputation with a single review, and he'd just seen everything he needed to see. Marcus Chen had been a Michelin inspector for 11 years. At 39, he'd evaluated hundreds of restaurants across North America, from hole-in-the-wall ethnic kitchens to white tablecloth establishments where a single meal cost more than most people's weekly groceries. His job required absolute anonymity. Restaurants could never know when he was coming, who he was, or what he looked like. The moment they knew, the entire evaluation became compromised. Michelin inspectors were trained to blend in, dress like regular customers, make reservations under fake names, pay with personal credit cards and submit expense reports later. The goal was simple: experience the restaurant exactly as any other diner would, then write a review that could award or destroy a restaurant's dreams of Michelin recognition. Marcus was biracial, black father, Chinese mother, and he'd learned early in his career that his appearance could trigger very different responses depending on the establishment. In casual restaurants, he was usually welcomed. In fine dining, the reception could be complicated. Some places treated him warmly. Others made assumptions based on his skin tone, his casual clothes, or the fact that he didn't fit their mental picture of their typical clientele. Tonight, he was evaluating Belmont's, an upscale French-American restaurant in Boston's Back Bay neighborhood. The owner, Chef Laurent Beaumont, had been lobbying the Michelin Guide for years to consider his restaurant for a star. The food had potential. Marcus had read the reviews, studied the menu, and heard buzz from industry contacts. But a restaurant wasn't just about food. It was about service, atmosphere, and, most importantly, how they treated every guest who walked through their doors. Marcus arrived at 7:30 p.m. on a Thursday evening, the restaurant's busiest night. He wore dark jeans, a simple button-down shirt, and clean sneakers. Not sloppy, but definitely not formal. He wanted to see how the staff responded to a customer who looked ordinary. The restaurant's exterior was elegant. Red awning, brass fixtures, soft lighting glowing through large windows. Through the glass, Marcus could see the dining room. White tablecloths, crystal stemware, well-dressed diners engaged in quiet conversation. Classical music drifted faintly into the street. He pushed through the heavy wooden door and stepped into the foyer. Immediately, a wave of warmth and the scent of butter, garlic, and fresh bread washed over him. The interior was stunning. Dark wood paneling, vintage French posters, a marble-topped bar where a bartender in a bow tie shook a cocktail shaker with practiced precision. Behind the hostess stand stood a woman in her early 40s, blonde hair pulled into a sleek chignon, wearing a black dress that screamed expensive. Her name tag read Claire Whitmore, manager. She was reviewing a seating chart, pen in hand, looking every bit the gatekeeper of an exclusive establishment. Marcus approached with a warm smile. "Good evening. Table for one, please." Claire looked up. Her eyes scanned him quickly. Jeans, casual shirt, sneakers. Her expression shifted. Not dramatically, but Marcus had been doing this long enough to recognize the subtle tells. The slight tightening around her mouth, the pause before responding, the way her gaze moved from his face to his clothes and back again. "Do you have a reservation?" Claire asked, her tone polite but cool. "No. I was hoping you might have a table available." Claire glanced down at her seating chart, then back at Marcus. "I'm sorry, we're fully booked tonight." Marcus glanced past her into the dining room. He counted quickly. Roughly 20 tables. At least 6 were empty, place settings untouched. It was 7:30 p.m., prime dinner time. If they were fully booked, those tables should have been filled. "Are you sure?" Marcus asked gently. "I see several open tables." Claire's smile tightened. "Those are reserved. We have guests arriving shortly." "I'm happy to wait at the bar until something opens up," Marcus offered. "I'm afraid we're booked solid through the evening," Claire replied, her voice firmer now. "Perhaps you could try one of the restaurants down the street. There's a sports bar 2 blocks over that doesn't require reservations." But his mind was already taking notes. Refused walk-in despite visible empty tables. Suggested sports bar instead of comparable fine dining. Tone dismissive. "I see," Marcus said quietly. "Thank you anyway." He turned to leave, but as he reached for the door handle, he heard voices behind him. A white couple in their 50s entered, the man in a blazer, the woman in a cocktail dress. They didn't have the polished look of regular fine diners. Their clothes were nice, but not expensive. "Good evening," Claire said, her voice suddenly warm and welcoming. "How may I help you?" "Hi," the man said. "We don't have a reservation, but we were hoping you might have a table. We're celebrating our anniversary." Marcus paused, his hand still on the door, listening. "Oh, how wonderful!" Claire exclaimed. "Congratulations! Let me see what I can do." She studied her seating chart for maybe 3 seconds. "You know what? I think we can accommodate you. We have a lovely table near the window. Right this way." Marcus turned around slowly. Claire was already leading the couple into the dining room, seating them at one of the reserved tables she'd claimed was unavailable 30 seconds earlier. The couple hadn't been dressed any more formally than Marcus. They hadn't had a reservation. The only difference was the color of their skin. Marcus walked back to the hostess stand. Claire returned a moment later, nearly colliding with him. "Oh," she said, startled. "I thought you'd left." "I changed my mind," Marcus said calmly. "I'd like to speak with the owner." Claire's expression hardened. "The owner is very busy. I'll wait." "Sir, I've already explained that we don't have any available tables." "I'm not asking for a table anymore," Marcus interrupted, his voice still calm but carrying unmistakable authority. "I'm asking to speak with Chef Beaumont. Now." Something in his tone made Claire hesitate. She studied his face, looking for signs of trouble, trying to decide if this was worth escalating. Finally, she picked up the phone behind the stand and dialed an extension. "Chef, there's a gentleman here who insists on speaking with you." A pause. "No, he doesn't have a reservation. He's persistent." Another pause. "Understood." She hung up and gave Marcus a tight smile. "Chef Beaumont will be out in a moment. Please wait here." Marcus nodded and stepped to the side. From his new vantage point, he could see into the dining room more clearly. The white couple Claire had just seated were already being served water and bread, a server hovering attentively. At another table, a young white woman in jeans and a sweater, dressed even more casually than Marcus, laughed with her companions over appetizers. So it wasn't about the dress code. It was never about the dress code. A few minutes later, a man emerged from the kitchen. Chef Laurent Beaumont was in his early 50s, tall and lean, with silver hair and sharp features. He wore chef's whites, slightly stained from the dinner service, and carried himself with the confident bearing of someone who'd spent decades perfecting his craft. "Good evening," Laurent said, extending his hand. "I'm Laurent Beaumont. How can I help you?" Marcus shook his hand. "Marcus Chen. I came in hoping for a table, but your manager informed me you're fully booked. I couldn't help but notice that shortly after she turned me away, she seated another couple without a reservation." Laurent's eyes flicked to Claire, who'd gone pale. "Is this true?" "They had special circumstances," Claire said quickly. "Anniversary." "And I didn't?" Marcus asked quietly. "What made their walk-in request different from mine?" Claire opened her mouth, then closed it. She had no answer that wouldn't sound exactly like what it was. Laurent looked between them. Understanding dawning on his face, he'd built his career in kitchens across America and Europe. He'd seen discrimination before, both subtle and overt, and he knew that if this escalated, it could damage everything he'd worked for. "Monsieur Chen," Laurent said carefully, "I apologize for any confusion. Please allow me to seat you personally. We'd be honored to have you dine with us tonight." "That won't be necessary," Marcus said. "I've already seen what I needed to see." Laurent's brow furrowed. "I don't understand." Marcus reached into his wallet and pulled out a business card. He handed it to Laurent. The color drained from Laurent's face. Claire made a small, strangled sound. "You're—" Laurent couldn't finish the sentence. "I'm the Michelin inspector," Marcus said calmly. "I was here tonight to conduct an anonymous evaluation of your restaurant. Your manager refused me service, claimed you were fully booked, then immediately seated a white couple who also didn't have a reservation. I've documented the entire interaction." Claire's knees buckled slightly. She gripped the hostess stand to steady herself. Laurent looked like he might be sick. "Monsieur Chen, please, this is a terrible misunderstanding." "It's not a misunderstanding," Marcus said firmly. "Your manager made a decision based on how I looked. She assumed I didn't belong here, and when I pointed out the inconsistency, she doubled down." He pulled out a small leather notebook, the kind every Michelin inspector carried, and flipped it open. "At 7:32 p.m., I requested a table for one. Manager Claire Whitmore refused, citing full capacity despite 6 visible empty tables. At 7:35 p.m., a white couple entered without reservation. Manager seated them immediately at a table she'd claimed was reserved. When questioned, manager suggested I try a sports bar down the street." Laurent's hands trembled. "Please, the food, the kitchen, we've worked so hard." "I'm sure you have," Marcus said, not unkindly. "But a Michelin star isn't just about food, it's about the entire dining experience. And the experience I just had? Discriminatory, unwelcoming, unacceptable." He closed the notebook and slipped it back into his pocket. "I'll be filing my report tomorrow. It will note that while I was unable to evaluate the cuisine due to being refused service, the front-of-house operations demonstrate a pattern of discriminatory behavior that makes this establishment unsuitable for Michelin recognition." Laurent's voice broke. "Please, this is my life's work." Marcus looked at him for a long moment. "Then maybe you should pay more attention to who you put in charge of your dining room." He turned to Claire, who looked like she might faint. "How many other customers have you turned away? How many black diners, Hispanic families, Asian couples? How many people walked through that door, excited to try this restaurant, only to be told you were fully booked when you weren't?" Claire's mouth opened, but no sound came out. "That's what I thought," Marcus said quietly. He walked toward the exit, then paused. "Chef Belmont, you have a choice. You can keep running your restaurant the way you have been, with staff who decide who belongs based on appearance. Or you can fix this. Really fix it. The decision is yours." Marcus left the restaurant and walked into the cool Boston night. Behind him, through the window, he could see Laurent and Claire in heated conversation, her gestures defensive, his face twisted in anguish. The next morning, Marcus filed his report with Michelin. It was thorough, detailed, and damning. Belmont's would not be receiving a star, not this year, possibly not ever, but the story didn't end there. 2 days later, Marcus received an email from Laurent Beaumont. "Monsieur Chen, I cannot express how deeply sorry I am for what happened at Belmont's. You were right about everything. Claire has been terminated. I've spent the last 48 hours reviewing our reservation logs, speaking with staff, and confronting the reality that I allowed discrimination to happen in my restaurant. I found evidence of other incidents. Customers turned away while tables sat empty. Complaints dismissed. Patterns I should have seen, but didn't, because I was too focused on the kitchen and not enough on the culture I'm implementing immediate changes. Mandatory bias training for all staff, a third-party review of our seating practices, and a public commitment to welcoming all guests equally. I know this doesn't undo what happened to you, but I hope it prevents it from happening to anyone else. I'm not asking for reconsideration of your review. I'm asking for a chance to prove that we can be better. Respectfully, Laurent Beaumont." Marcus read the email twice. Then he wrote back, "Chef Beaumont, thank you for your email. Real change requires acknowledgement, action, and accountability. You've started with the first 2. Time will show the third. My review stands, but I'll be watching to see if your commitments become reality. If they do, perhaps we'll meet again under different circumstances. Respectfully, M.E. Chen." 6 months later, Marcus walked by Belmont's during a visit to Boston for other evaluations. He didn't go inside, but he paused to look through the window. The dining room was full, and for the first time he saw what he'd hoped to see, a diverse mix of diners, Black couples, Asian families, Hispanic professionals, people of all backgrounds seated together, enjoying the kind of meal they deserved to enjoy without having to prove they belonged. Laurent Beaumont stood near the kitchen door, watching his dining room with something that looked like pride. Not pride in Michelin stars or critical acclaim. Pride in having built something that welcomed everyone. Marcus smiled to himself and kept walking. Maybe one day he'd come back for an anonymous evaluation. And maybe, just maybe, the experience would be different because change was possible. It just required people in power to actually give a damn. If this story resonated with you, remember, discrimination in restaurants isn't just about being denied a meal. It's about being told you don't belong in spaces you have every right to occupy. It's about assumptions made in seconds that echo for lifetimes. But when people in authority refuse to tolerate it, culture can change. Share this story. Subscribe for more moments that challenge us to see everyone as worthy of dignity. And if you work in hospitality, remember, every guest who walks through your door deserves the same respect, regardless of how they look.